Well, we'll start today with more data on this rollicking economy we're all experiencing, and a highly predictable reaction, if you might say so yourself. A new CNN poll: my life is not affordable. No one cares. 76% of Americans say cost of living issues are their biggest economic problem. And guess who is so very concerned?
When you're negotiating with Iran, Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that motivates.
So yeah, I filled up my tank a few days ago, $65 at $4.59 a gallon here in upstate New York. I made my last car payment recently too, but I need my rear brakes done. That'll be another $700 plus, so on and on. All told, if you've caught yourself thinking it's more expensive just to exist, you're not alone. A new national poll paints a pretty stark picture of how Americans are feeling about the economy. And the common thread isn't complicated. People feel stuck. Not temporarily stressed, not merely annoyed by a few pricey items at the store, but genuinely boxed in by the day-to-day cost of living. The poll, conducted for CNN by SSRS, finds that cost of living pressures have surged to the top of the list of economic problems families are facing. In other words, when people are asked what's hitting them the hardest, they're not starting with stock markets or big macroeconomic concepts. They're talking about rent, groceries, gas, the basics. And that frustration is showing up in how people look at the future. Nearly 7 in 10 respondents say they think a recession is likely within the next year. That's not a small pocket of pessimism, that's a broad sense of dread. Even if the economy on paper has some decent-looking indicators, the lived experience a lot of households are describing is, I'm working, I'm paying bills, and I'm not getting ahead. And here's where it gets tricky. The national economic story can sound surprisingly resilient. Consumer spending is held up, job growth has been strong. For a long stretch, paychecks were rising faster than inflation. But averages can be misleading because they don't tell you who is actually feeling relief. According to the reporting around this poll, wage growth did outpace inflation for nearly 3 years in a row, but that run ended recently. And other data points suggest that for middle and lower income Americans, the point where wages stopped keeping up came even earlier. So while the headline numbers might suggest things are stabilizing, plenty of households have been absorbing higher prices with no real breathing room. That's why the mood has stayed sour. In CNN's polling, the public's view of the economy has been negative for 5 straight years. Think about that. Through different phases of recovery and inflation and shifting headlines, the dominant theme hasn't really lifted. One of the most telling results is this. An overwhelming share of people say this is a better time to save than spend on something big. Nearly 9 in 10 feel that way. And it's not just one slice of the country saying it, it's across income levels. That tells you something important about confidence. When people don't feel secure, they hold back, even if they can technically maybe spend. A lot of this traces back to the period after the pandemic, when prices jumped fast and the housing market became, for many, basically out of reach. Inflation has cooled compared to its peak, but people haven't reset their expectations to the new, higher baseline. A carton of eggs can come down from the worst moment and still feel expensive if the old normal is what you're comparing it to. And housing is a huge part of that story. When people say they feel locked out, it's not only about buying a home, it's about rents, mortgage rates, and the sense that the next step up is no longer realistic. Even if someone has a job and is earning more than they used to, the latter feels farther away. And when the poll asks people, in their own words, what their biggest financial issue is, cost of living dominates. And within that, food and gas stand out. One detail that jumped off the page, the share of Americans who specifically pointed to gas prices rose sharply compared with a year ago. That's the kind of expense that hits fast and visibly, of course. You can't ignore it when you're staring at the pump. The worry is constant for a lot of people. About a third say they worry all or most of the time that their income won't cover their expenses. And a big additional chunk say they worry at least some of the time. Put together, that's a country where financial stress isn't rare, it's routine. And it's not just about whether bills can be paid. It's about whether life includes anything extra. Most respondents say they can't comfortably pay for add-ons that used to feel normal, like a nice dinner out or even a vacation. Only around a third say they could comfortably handle a $1,000 emergency expense. That's a crucial number, because emergencies aren't theoretical. Cars break, kids get sick, rent goes up. A sudden expense is one of the most common ways people get pushed from barely okay to, I'm in fucking trouble. Then there's the deeper belief behind all this. Many Americans don't think the system is designed for them. Roughly 3/4 say the economy unfairly favors powerful interests. And fewer than half say that people who want to get ahead can do it just by working hard. That's a big shift in the national story we tell ourselves. If the promise is work hard and you'll be fine, and people stop believing it, that has consequences way beyond personal budgeting. That disbelief shows up in personal assessments too. About half say they're dissatisfied with their own financial situation, and more people say their finances have gotten worse over the last year than say they've improved. That's the opposite of what you'd expect if people were feeling the benefit of slowing inflation or steady job growth. Another result cuts across almost every type of worker. About 2/3 of employed Americans say their pay isn't keeping up with rising prices. Office workers, factory workers, outdoor job sites, different education levels, different income brackets. The same complaint keeps coming up. And even among households earning $150,000 or more than half still say they feel like they're falling behind. That doesn't mean those households are experiencing the same hardship as those living paycheck to paycheck, but it does show how widespread the perception is that prices are outrunning earnings. And so when people zoom out and compare life now to the past, the verdict is blunt. About 3/4 say it's harder to get ahead today than it was a generation ago, and a similar share think it'll be even tougher for the next generation. That's not just economic anxiety, that's intergenerational pessimism. And one response from the survey captured the mood in a single sentence. Someone said they're making more money than ever, but they have less freedom than ever because prices keep climbing. That idea, less freedom even with higher income, might be the best way to understand why people are so frustrated. It's not only that things cost more, it's that the extra effort doesn't seem to translate into any extra options. And this is where the political stakes come in. When cost of living becomes the number one issue for so many households, it spills into elections and into trust in institutions. People vote based on what they feel at the grocery store and the rent payment, not whether a chart says the economy is expanding. So what should we take away from this poll? First, the headline economic picture can't substitute for the household reality. Second, inflation cooling down doesn't automatically make people feel whole again, especially when housing and everyday expenses still feel elevated. And third, the sense that the system is tilted is becoming a mainstream belief, not a fringe opinion. So if you're listening and thinking, yeah, that's exactly it, I'm just staying afloat, know that this feeling is widespread and measurable. The challenge now, for policymakers and for communities, is whether anything changes in a way that people can actually feel in their monthly budgets. Because until that happens, the numbers can say recovery, but daily life will keep saying something else.
Let's turn now to the economic impact of the war with Iran. The latest inflation report out today showed price increases for American consumers in April hit a 3-year high, driven by a spike in the cost of gasoline. The Consumer Price Index, which includes energy and food costs, rose 3.8% year over year. That's according to the Labor Department. And that's compared to 2.4% in February, before the start of the war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. To unpack today's numbers, let's turn again to Heather Long, Chief Economist at Navy Federal Credit Union. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So today's headline inflation rate is the highest we've seen since 2023, up 0.5 percentage point from last month. What stands out to you in this report?
Inflation is a major problem again for the U.S. economy, and it's not just gas. We obviously are all feeling it as we go to the pump to fill up our cars, but it's also electricity prices. You mentioned food prices, everything from coffee to beef to a lot of vegetables are really up in price, some medical care costs, and don't forget those airfares have gone way up. So this is a broad problem, and it's hard for many to hide from. And the other thing that really stood out in this report is for the first time in 3 years, inflation is wiping out all wage gains. So you mentioned 3.8% inflation in the past year versus 3.6% wage gains. That means people are not able to make ends meet right now, a lot of Americans.
Realistically, how much power does a president have to fight inflation in a moment like this?
Not a lot. President Biden learned that the hard way, and now President Trump and his administration is really grappling with this. There's not much they can do. Even the gas tax would need approval from Congress, so they can't just flip a light switch on that. And so his hands are really tied for a while, and unfortunately, obviously, people are really upset with the current situation that's going on. I do think tariffs is probably his easiest option. That's something he can do, and certainly a lot of Americans, as they're thinking about those Memorial Day cookouts and what they want to cook, and looking at these prices for hamburgers and for steaks, would love to see a little relief.
And the ripple effects are widespread, of course. Here's a local situation up here that's been a persistent issue recently. The timing now, however, is really impeccable.
Well, there is more homelessness in Jefferson County and Watertown than ever before. That's the assessment of one Watertown City Council member after getting an update on how efforts to address it are going. As 7 News reporter Mark Mason Jr. learns, the rate of homelessness is up more than 50% over the past 5 years.
The amount of homeless people now in Watertown is the most lifelong resident and City Council member Doug Osborne has seen ever.
It's been much more visible to the public than I think it's ever been. And I think that just means that we need to really address this head on.
But addressing it has proven difficult for city and county officials who met Monday night and say they're working an uphill battle against the larger issue, statewide homelessness.
So if you look at this statistic here, New York State homelessness is about 4 times greater than the rest of the nation. And that population is increasing.
This data, pulled from last year's Comptroller report, shows the homeless population in the North Country has gone up about 54% in the last 5 years. The majority of those homeless believed to be from Jefferson County, primarily in Watertown. County officials say outreach programs have been helping hundreds get into homes, but it's slow going and reliant on building trust. Watertown Councilmember Ben Schoen says it's easy to see why people are coming to New York and Watertown. He says it's because the number of homeless with access to shelter is much higher here.
If you want to be homeless somewhere, you're going to go where the services are. It may be, and I could be considered insensitive, but to think that the more you offer, the more you're going to attract.
Councilmember Osborne says with all that in mind, he believes the city and county are doing the best they can.
The municipalities and localities can only do so much to address this issue. It's really going to take, more than just money from the state to address it.
Osborne expects homelessness to continue to be a topic that residents bring up until it's not seen as much on the streets of the city. Mark Mason Jr., 7 News.